Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kanban for Remote Teams webinar hosted by SquirrelNorth. My name is James Steele, and on behalf of the SquirrelNorth team, I'd like to thank you all for spending time with us today. In today's webinar, we'll be focusing our attention on how to effectively use Kanban to improve your business's performance while working remotely. Our aim is to provide you with guidance that is practical, proven, and immediately applicable. But before we get started, I'd like to briefly introduce you to SquirrelNorth and our three guest speakers. SquirrelNorth is a Canadian firm founded by 4 partners who work with businesses around the globe to bring about improved service delivery and sustainable business results. Our services include consulting, training, and coaching. We are experts in the Kanban method, and we are all accredited by Kanban University. The SquirrelNorth team, who will all be involved in today's presentation, are Martin Aziz and Fernando Cuenca, who will be presenting the webinar content, Alexei Zheglov, who will be monitoring the questions that come in during the webinar, and myself, James Steele, who will be your host. Of course, you can learn more about us by visiting our website at squirrelnorth.com. As I mentioned, we also have 3 guest speakers who will be providing an overview of some digital Kanban tools. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Sonia Sidorova from Nave, Mahesh Singh from Digite, and Dimitar Karaivanov from Kanbanize. We'll be hearing more from our guests a little later in the webinar. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. If you have any questions during the webinar, I'd encourage you to enter them into the questions panel by clicking on the Q&A button. We hope to address as many of those as we can during the presentation. And if we have enough time at the end of the webinar, our panel will be available to participate in that Q&A. For now, I'd like to turn things over to Fernando, who will get things underway. Fernando?
All right, thank you, James. So I think we can all agree that the last few weeks have been remarkable. Something very interesting has happened, and almost overnight, we all found ourselves in the need to, work remotely, work from home. So I guess the first natural instinct for everyone was to try to figure out what the mechanics for the remote work is. So how do we essentially reproduce at home or carry out at home the things that we were used to do in the office? So if you've been paying attention to social media lately, probably you've noticed lots of advice and guidance and information being shared about remote facilitation, about communication and teamwork when you're distributed, and how to encourage trust and collaboration in that type of environment. So when we were figuring out how to approach this webinar, we wanted to take a slightly different angle, perhaps. So we know that Kanban is about managing work and not the workers. So we wanted to take a wider look at the problem, see what the nature of the change we're going through is, and what are the implications in terms of managing the work for a very dispersed type of environment. So I am sure that most people here are going to be familiar with the model like this, the STATIK model of the J-curve. So we know that when a change happens, we will experience a drop in performance, a temporal degradation in performance as we are going through the change, and that usually involves some level of stress, trying new things, until a new level of performance is achieved. And we know that during that period, we require empathy for people that go through the change, yourself included, because there's lots of stress and lots of new things to learn. And well, it takes time. Now, we also know that this is the logical and reasoned reaction to this situation, but it's definitely not the only one. There are other models. So here's another one. What this other model tells us is that this initial reaction probably is not going to be logical and reasoned, but it's going to be an emotional reaction. It's guided by what we call our system 1, our emotional side. Our system 2, our logical side, that follows, more objective type of guidance, well, that it is quick to recognize the situations, but slow to act. And it takes some time for system 1 to catch up with this system 2, this logical thinking. So the reaction is most likely going to be, as I said, emotional, flight or fight type of thing. And this probably helps explain all these calls that we've seen also lately about smooth transition to remote work and performance not being affected and quickly return to normal, to business as usual. But we know these things take time. And the important thing to realize here is that we've essentially lost our balance. We need to get our bearings again. This is our adjustment period until new expectations are set. So the question is, how can we go about getting our bearings again? So in Kanban, we have these things we call the agendas, which are motivations for applying Kanban. And well, we figured that maybe this is a place where we can look for inspiration when we're trying to regain balance. So the first agenda is about sustainability, the sustainability agenda, and it's all about sustainable pace and improving focus. We normally try to apply this to teams, but in the current context, we can also redirect it to the individual and see how individuals can use these type of ideas to limit what we call the existential overhead, this feeling of overburdening, of overloading, maybe managing your commitments in a different way and avoid this situation of having too much on your plate, so to speak. So practices like personal Kanban and personal reflection are tools or practices I can use to help with this agenda. And applying the Kanban principles at the personal level may be of help for people just trying to manage the stress of having work and life playing concurrently at the same time at home. Then there is the service orientation agenda. This is the agenda that directs us to focus our attention on service performance and customer satisfaction. Now, things have changed not just for us, but for our customers, which means that the things that were adequate for them before may not be the same that are adequate now. So their fitness criteria might have changed. So maybe this is the time to reassess our understanding of fitness criteria, evaluate new expectations, and based on that, reconfigure existing services or adapting our capabilities. The main tools for this are going to be things like STATIK and the Kanban cadences. We're going to be going into more detail about those later in the webinar. And finally, there's the survivability agenda, probably the most relevant in the current climax, where the big question is, how do we stay competitive and adaptive and essentially survive in the longer run? What does it mean to stay viable in this type of environment that we have today? And based on that understanding, what new services we need to deploy, what capabilities we need to develop? Is it possible that the services we were offering before now have become obsolete or irrelevant and they have to be replaced by new ones? Things that before weren't perhaps that not very important now have come to the forefront. So essentially, we may need to rethink our strategic direction. And that leads me to this next question, the question of making predictions and plans for the future. Can we predict what's going to happen in the next 6 months? So I'm sure some would argue that before this question was wishful thinking already, that trying to predict that long into the future was too much. But I'm sure by now, at least we can agree that this is much more difficult than it used to be. So in Kanban, we have a way to think about this problem in general. We like to conceptualize end-to-end delivery workflows as having two sections, an upstream portion, a downstream portion separated by this commitment line. So in the upstream portion, we capture options and we capture ideas and things to potentially work on, and we refine them, and we filter, we narrow down the list to a short list of things we can commit to. And once we make a commitment, we work on delivering that. That's the downstream portion, the downstream delivery. Now, Today, we have an uncertainty horizon that is definitely much closer. Things are changing by the day. It's very difficult to know what's going to happen next week, let alone next 3 months or 6 months. So it's certainly the case that the downstream delivery portion needs to be much faster and predictable than it was before. For many of you who might be working, for example, for the banking industry, I am sure you have been very busy in the last few weeks and days reconfiguring your systems and your services so that you can support all the new programs that governments are putting in place to support people through this transition. So, and people can't wait weeks and weeks for that to be delivered, so that the downstream delivery definitely needs to be fast. But changes are also needed in the upstream portion, because now we may need to select options differently. We may need to choose what to work on what to focus on in a different way, refine it differently. And also, consequently, we may need to reevaluate the frequency in which commitments are made. So before, perhaps it was okay to just decide to make commitments or replenish our downstream cycle every 6 months. But maybe today that's not appropriate anymore. So all this needs to be reevaluated. So that leads you to a complete reconfiguration of your delivery pipelines. And that means that you need to start rethinking the way we do things here. How does work happen here? And that is something that Martin is going to walk us through. Martin.
All right, thank you, Fernando. All right, so let's start by just kind of putting Kanban into some context, right? So, you know, what is Kanban really? You're using a method to reflect what you're doing right now. And the idea here is that with Kanban, a large portion of what you're doing is you're trying to create a model of your process. So the idea is you have this model of your process, and you're using that model in some way to mimic what's happening in real life. So if you think about your board, your metrics, and all the various things that you do, you're trying to actually capture what's happening in real life. But it's just that, it's a model and it's a platform for management. So the thing we need to realize here is that given that our process may go through some change, we need to accept that reality and inspect the model and to make sure that the model itself is still intact. So, so the idea here is that, okay, so imagine this was your existing process. You are going through a number of steps in order for your customers to receive what it is that they're looking for. And so you have gone through a certain flow, and here comes remote work. And remote work is now introducing some disruption to that flow. So the flow is changing, all right? So you are going to be going through new paths, potentially new sources of delay are arriving. Others that may have been part of your experience are gone. So the question you should be asking yourself is the model that I have used for my Kanban in the past still sound? So a lot of this is, you know, if you have been doing Kanban for a while and you've all of a sudden experienced this change in terms of how you work, you can't really ignore that reality. You're going to have to go back and inspect, is my model actually sound with regards to how the work is actually being done right now? So the idea of we are now going through a different flow, and what is that implication to the overall Kanban design that I've gone through? So, you know, what are some things that may change, right? So imagine you have an existing Kanban board, and so you might be looking at your design and saying, well, do I need this buffer here? You know, maybe this is not where things are piling up and it's somewhere else. So I may need to put a buffer somewhere else and remove another one from an existing point in my process. Does every stage in my process still make sense? And so you may have to introduce new stages or remove existing ones. In particular, policies, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail later on, but you know, do they still make sense? Do you need to introduce new ones, ways of dealing with your current way of working? Does everything qualify for the various existing classes of service. So are you still even offering all your existing classes of service? So we'll talk about that in a bit. And then your work item types. Is the nature of what your service offers actually changing? Are you providing the marketplace with the exact same offering as you have in the past? Or is that in fact changing? So going back to this idea of your process changing, where is a lot of that coming from? So the question you might want to honestly answer is, does it actually take more effort to deliver your services now? And it may not be the case for everyone, but for a lot of companies who have relied on co-location, chances are, particularly early on, that is in fact true, that your effort is actually going to be going up to deliver your existing services. So, where is this coming from? You've got this new highly dispersed teams. Everyone is in different locations. It's not just one person, but pretty much everyone. And so that dispersion doesn't take away the need to keep everyone aligned and synchronized. What changes is the amount of effort it takes to actually achieve that. So we need to increase our ability to keep everyone synchronized and aligned. And so that doesn't necessarily come for free, particularly early on in your adjustment to this change. So you'll want to think about what that, where that is all coming from. This idea of new overhead that wasn't there before. Now, in Kanban, we actually have a name for that, and that is coordination costs. So coordination costs is all the extra bit of work that you have to do in order for all the actual meaningful value-add work to take place. And a lot of you who are maybe more advanced Kanban practitioners may actually be familiar with a model that we're seeing on the screen. But this idea of, imagine the total of all of the work that is being done. So if you were to take 100% of everything that's being done, if we were to section it off into various bits, some of it is value add, obviously, but some of it is coordination costs. And so what happens here is, if your coordination costs are growing, it's going to put a squeeze on everything else. So, it essentially means the value add is going to go down. So a simpler way of saying this is, imagine for every $100 your business spends, historically, you've got $30 of new value add. Now imagine that dropping to $10 or less. And that may not be sustainable. So you want to have some way of addressing that. Now, the good news is Kanban has already really considered this problem for some time, and we really know what the main antidote is. And that is really going back to one of the tried and true methods within Kanban, is looking at your work in process. So one of the things that we have noticed in terms of how coordination costs grow is that it tends to grow as WIP grows. And the interesting thing here is it grows non-linearly, which means that as you grow WIP, your work in process, or your batch size, as that grows, your coordination cost actually grows at a faster rate. So it's growing faster than the value add section. So how do you counteract that? You lower WIP, right? So the idea here is that lower WIP, smaller batches could be a very powerful remedy to get your coordination costs in order. So it kind of makes intuitive sense. Less things going on, less things to follow up on, less meetings, less status checks, and so on. So the idea here is you want to go in and start to inspect your work in process limits and see if they still make sense. So you'll have to play around with them, figure out what your new WIP limit equilibrium looks like. Your past one, which may have been perfectly fine, may no longer be effective anymore. And so the idea here is to try and kick the tires on your WIP limits and make sure that they still make sense. Okay, so there's a bunch of changes that I talked about how do we go about doing it? So another bit of good news, we already have the toolkit for that, and it comes back to STATIK. Now, for those of you who don't know what STATIK is, it means systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban. And it's been typically used for two things. Primarily, a lot of people use it as a Kanban bootstrap, a way of kicking off Kanban for a brand new service to really just kind of orient Kanban properly and start effectively. The other use for STATIK is for a refresh. And this is a really good practice that a lot of people don't do. And it's the part that we're actually going to be focusing on. So a refresh is essentially looking at our Kanban design and say, does it still make sense in my current context? Time has gone by since we've done STATIK last. And does the look on all the things that we're offering our customers and so on still make sense? So let's look at some of the main areas that we might uncover using a refresh mode with STATIK. All right, so one of the areas in STATIK is this idea of demand analysis. So it's really understanding this fundamental concept of who are your customers and what are they asking for. So in context of what's going on, you may be wanting to ask this, are there certain things that people just don't need anymore and you're having drop demand? Are there certain things that, well, you know what, there's still some need, but it's not as high as it used to be. And there's some demand that might be coming out of nowhere and it's new, and it might be something that you need to offer, but certainly your customers are asking for it. And finally, there might be some things that you are in fact already offering, but the demand has just gone through the roof. And these icons can kind of give you a sense of, in the context of a lot of places, certainly in Canada, that these are the items that seem to have followed that characteristic. All right, so on the next thing with regards to revisiting STATIK, look at your sources of dissatisfaction. In particular, if you are going to be offering a new work item type, which is essentially a new offering to your customers, particularly if they're asking for it, you'll want to very quickly get a sense of, how fit is it? What are some dissatisfaction around the delivery of that? And you'll want to have a lens on it from both perspectives. Your customers, so are they actually going to be getting a fit service or product? And so if it's not, what does that do to your brand? What does that do to your organization? So dealing with that and having awareness of that is pretty important. And also, what is it going to do to your staff? What is it going to do internally? What's the internal perspective? Are you going to be asking too much? Are you equipped? Is it sustainable? Is this something that you are actually in a position to offer? So doing this is, a worthwhile step, particularly in context of what Kanban is. You are not there to make Kanban look great, but you're there to make your service great. And so this list of, external and internal sources of dissatisfaction is essentially your backlog of things to improve using the Kanban method. So you're going to introduce a new work item type. Great. Let's make sure it's fit. The other aspect of source of dissatisfaction is, well, imagine you had your list. You've done STATIK quite some time ago, and there's a whole bunch of things that you've improved, but there's a few things on the list that just haven't changed. They've been just sitting there forever. And, as Kanban coaches, we usually refer to these things as rocks, things that are just not movable, and we kind of have this coaching stance of going around these rocks. Now, this might not be always true in that when a lot of large change is taking place, some of these rocks may not be very rock-like. And so, going through a large process change that may be company-wide might be a good opportunity for you to go in and look at some of these things that you've always wanted to change, and for some reason you haven't been able to. Maybe it's political, maybe it's something to do with the culture, and you just have not been able to figure out the right path to get these changes through. Now may actually be the time to go back and see what, what sacred cows that are essentially unchangeable you could actually go in and make a change on. Certainly by the time that things have settled to their new normal and we're reestablishing equilibrium, the opportunity has passed. So for this one, I would say the moment to strike is probably soon. So you'll want to be going back to your list of sources of dissatisfaction, saying, what are some of these in the past unpragmatic and hard to change things? What could we change right now? So the other thing that you want to consider is your existing capabilities. So again, capability analysis, looking at what does it take to deliver something to your customers, deliver your services. And if your process is changing and you haven't really gone through a whole bunch of time Kanbanizing and improving its delivery, you may find yourself with a capability that is not as good as it was in the past. So this is what you're seeing on the screen is a run chart. And it's basically keeping track of your capability over time. So how long does it take to deliver a particular service? So, step one is if you haven't been using this type of metric, it's probably a sign you should go ahead and try and put it together. There's probably tons of data that you have in terms of your historical capability already. And take a look and start monitoring your new capability. And if your new capability is not within a zone of existing SLAs, you're going to have to do a couple of things. You're going to have to sort of, accept reality and offer a new SLA that is congruent with what your actual capability is. And then kind of compare that SLA with what is fit for your customers. So if the SLA you're offering is, not fit enough for your customers' expectations, then obviously the next thing is to do is figure out what is the reason for that capability and start to look at your source of delays, and basically you're doing Kanban again to improve things. Now, the other thing is you will want to also understand your customer expectations a little bit better. Their past expectations may have changed. So, I mean, if anyone has tried to order anything from Amazon recently, your next day, or in some markets, same day shipping is pretty much a non-existing offering. And so, is that still good enough? Probably for quite a few people. So you want to have a look at that as well. The other thing that you want to be very clear on is this idea of classes of service. So the idea here is that for every service, for every work item type, for every product that you offer to the market, you can offer it in various different ways. So first class versus economy class. And in Kanban, we typically refer to a number of different archetypes, but typically you hear things like standard, fixed date, and expedite. And so, what's happening when your standard, which is the regular offering, may not be as good as it was once before. So, you've changed your process. There's some, your remote team process is not optimized. There's changes in the marketplace, and your standard is just not as good as it was. So what we have, experienced in the past, that when your standard is not necessarily good enough, tends to increase the demand for higher classes of service. So more people are asking for fixed date. More people are asking for expedite. So this is a bit of a challenge because the more people ask for these things, and if you give it to them, it's going to make all of your service classes not as good as they were. So standard is not that great. Fixed date, you're not meeting your dates, and expedite, you're slow to be able to respond. So this is an opportunity to go back to your work item types, your offerings, and say, what class of services are we actually going to be offering? And maybe in some cases you have been offering fixed dates, and you may want to take that off the menu and say, well, it doesn't really make sense in the current climate to actually offer that class of service. The other thing you want to look at is what are the criteria for offering a higher class of service. So in the past, there might have been some conditions to get expedite or a fixed date. And you may want to tighten those conditions and say, okay, well, here are the new criteria. It has to be this type of thing in order to become an expedite. So things that have been qualifying in the past may no longer qualify. And essentially, you're trying to figure out what are the real fire trucks that are emergencies that you need to kind of support, and what are the toy fire trucks masquerading as fire trucks that, you know, stick to standard and, you know, they don't really qualify. So we, you know, a lot of this gets expressed through what we call policies in Kanban. So this idea of working agreements that people adopt with the Kanbanizing of their system. So you'll want to go through this list and figure out what of these agreements still make sense. So here's just some a sample of things that you could ask, like, for example, who makes updates to the board? Perhaps in the past it was decentralized. Perhaps there are certain roles that will emerge for who's making it. When are the updates made? Perhaps they were done right before a stand-up, and maybe that needs to be a little bit quicker. How is the service delivery manager notified of a change? Perhaps it was done at the stand-up, and maybe now it's a real-time challenge, and it has to be done in real time in terms of notification of change to any kind of work item in your process. And perhaps you need to do some sort of automation of some of these steps. What quality steps do we perform to offset things that we have done that required co-location? So maybe you are still doing some sort of pair programming as a quality measure, but maybe not always, and maybe it's not always available. And so what are you offsetting? So if you're thinking about transition policies from one step in your Kanban process to another, maybe you need to come up with some new rules to offset that. And then we also obviously talked about work and process limits earlier on. And so then we also have in Kanban our cadences. And so these are our feedback loops. So, you know, there are the various suggested cadences through the Kanban method that keep everything aligned and your services fit. You will want to re-examine them through a lens of kind of these three things: frequency, how often they should be done, what are their structure, and what are their durations. So, you know, going back to something that Fernando said earlier about empathy and understanding where your various team members are at, you know, they may be an environment that's, you know, it's not solely office anymore. And so there are other needs that are competing for their attention, their support. And so this may be family members, this may be pets, this may be other obligations. And so while, you know, a lot of your team is maybe necessarily stepping up and giving you the total hours and support you need, maybe not in one stretch. So if you're thinking about, you know, meetings that go beyond 2 hours or even less than that, you know, do they need to be broken up into chunks? Do they need to be, do you need to maybe taking breaks and, you know, reflect that reality that people are going through? Other things with regards to, you know, frequency, you know, Fernando talked about this when he had the slide talking about your roadmap and upstream Kanban. And so something like your replenishment frequency, you know, if you have been doing that fairly infrequently in the past, it suggests that, you know, things are fairly stable and the things that you are committing to are good options for quite some time. That may not be the case. So if your market is having rapid change and experiencing all sorts of unexpected things, then shifting to committing to fewer things but replenishing much more frequently may be the thing that allows you to adapt to that sort of thing. Now, on the other side, you know, there might be all sorts of overhead with converging meetings as well. So certain other meetings, perhaps your ops review, if you're doing those sorts of things, maybe a longer one and less frequent might be the way to go for that. So it's not kind of a one-size-fits-all remedy for all things, but the idea here is go back into looking at your cadences, see which ones you're doing, see which ones you're not doing, and whether you want to do them, and make sure that the frequency, structure, and duration make sense for what you're going through. There is no kind of, here is the recommended amount for each of these things. You want to have to go in and design that for yourself. So a lot of this stuff, you know, requires you to kind of work together, figure things out, get a good model. And so, you know, the tools of the past, if we were thinking about co-location, may have been perfectly fine and may not be good enough in your now distributed team world. And so I'm going to pass the mic back to Fernando as he kind of talks about the implications of tools and what you should be thinking about.
All right. Thank you, Martin. And so let's talk about, or let's take a closer look at the role that tools play here. There are definitely many options for tools out there. You will be hearing about 3 good ones after this section of the webinar from our guests. But there's definitely a large ecosystem there. And something we've noticed is that the first thing people tend to think when they approach the tooling problem is, how do I reproduce my board in a digital environment? So they're thinking about the stickies and that place somewhere on the wall. And we wanted to convey a message here saying that the going digital is much more than simply transferring, stickies and having virtual stickies on a virtual wall. There are actually 4 big areas that you might want to consider when you are building your ecosystem, your virtual environment. So the visual model aspect is definitely the first. That's, any Kanban tool will have this as the very basic entry point. It's like the low bar of entry. But the important point to think about here, or to realize, is that what distinguishes really low maturity tools from higher maturity tools, like the ones you will hear next, is their ability to represent a rich visual model of your work. So the board that you have on the wall is not just stickies on the wall with just your work. It's a richer model that includes things like, for example, how your work is classified. We call that work item types. Include things like how that different types of works are processed, classes of service. All those pieces of work are bound by rules that we follow. Those are the policies. We make commitments, so there are commitment points and delivery points, so there are special points in the workflow. And there may be other things like indications of who's working on what, and checklists as we follow when we've complete different pieces of work that's going to be represented in ticket design. So the point here is that the board contains much more than just the work. It's a rich model, something that represents a conceptual view of your work, a mental model, if you want, that's reproduced somehow in visual format. So the first thing to look for in a tool is how much the tool supports or helps you construct this rich model of your work, not just stickies on the wall. Then there is the metrics aspect. Most tools will offer some sort of quantitative analysis of the work. The question to be looking at here is, when you evaluate the tool, is how comprehensive that is. Does it offer, for example, at the very least, flow metrics like lead times and throughput and WIP? But the point here is how much flexibility does the tool offer in terms of configuring how the metrics are calculated and how they're represented. So for example, lead time is going to be a basic metric to track, but lead time requires you to define a commitment point and a delivery point, two points in time. How much flexibility does the tool give you in configuring where those points in time are? Or does it make assumptions about where time starts ticking and stop ticking, for example? And once you have the data, how is it represented? Because you might want to see the same metric under multiple forms. You might want to see a CFD to see how it evolves over time. You want to see a histogram. You want to see a range chart or a scatter plot to make analysis of patterns. So 2 things to consider here: flexibility in configuration and flexibility in representation. A third aspect to think about is the collaboration aspect. So now, if you have a group of people that are distributed, they still need to collaborate, and the collaboration goes beyond just talking about the work. They may need to have unstructured conversations or discussions about problem solving or about the design or planning, whatever it is. So does the tool give you some tools for having those unstructured conversations, like a whiteboard with stickies, for example, a whiteboard with free form annotations? So support for collaboration would be my first criteria. And finally, the last aspect is realizing that not all the information that we have goes on the ticket. And conversely, not information that's on the ticket is all we know about the world. There is much more stuff we need to be aware of. Context information, reference information, and all that needs to be stored somewhere and somehow referenced back to the model. So the last thing to consider is whether the tools you have contain some sort of repository for keeping all this contextual information, or the capabilities of these tools to integrate with other tools that do that, so that you can keep a coherent model with all the information you need. Things like, for example, the outcomes from your cadences or the static artifacts, all that needs to be referenced back to the actual word that's represented on the wall. And with that, I'll give it back to James.
All right, thank you very much, Martin and Fernando. Before we move on to our three guest speakers, I just want to make a couple of brief announcements. If you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, then please be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that by visiting our website. We'll be announcing more upcoming webinars there. We're also really excited to announce that we are launching a podcast. So we've already started the recordings for those, and so stay tuned for that. We've also been working hard to adapt and retool our accredited Kanban training courses, and we're pleased to announce that we now have online classes available. So this June, we have 2 classes running. We have Kanban for Scrum teams and Kanban system design. In July, we have our Agile metrics class, as well as our Kanban management professional class. Do note that our Agile metrics class is an exclusive SquirrelNorth offering, something really popular with our customers, so be sure to check that out. In addition, if you're looking to become an accredited Kanban coaching professional, then you'll want to attend our in-person class this September in Toronto. So now that I've mentioned our newsletter, our upcoming podcast, and our training offerings, I do want to extend an invitation for all of you to leverage our webinar-only exclusive offer. We're offering 50% discount off of all of our online training classes. You just need to register for a class on our website using the webinar discount codes that you see on this slide. I'll be showing those again later. In addition, if you're interested, again, this is exclusive to our webinar attendees only. SquirrelNorth would like to extend an offer for you to receive 45 minutes of free online consultation. As I mentioned, more details on these offers will be available at the end of the webinar. We'll redirect you to a screen with all of those details. I'd like to now get into the portion of the webinar where we're going to receive an overview of 3 digital Kanban tools that all have the capability to help you in working remotely with Kanban. First, I'd like to again welcome Mahesh Singh from Digite, who is going to present to us Swift Kanban. Mahesh?
Thank you, James. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully you can see it here and into the presentation. Hopefully we have enough time to go through these slides. I will try and keep things fast and flowing. Welcome to all of the people who are on the webinar. Thank you for the opportunity to the tool vendors for participating in this webinar. Swift Kanban and Digite have been in the business of helping remote and distributed teams since 2002. And in fact, we heard the term geographically distributed teams and collaboration at the time when we were interacting with some of the analysts that were helping us define our positioning. Just a quick introduction to the company. We are headquartered in California. We have offices in US, Europe, and in India. Nearly 1 million active licenses of our various products worldwide and so forth. And like I said, helping globally distributed teams collaborate for nearly two decades. We have a range of different products for overall enterprise agility coverage. Of course, we're going to focus on Swift Kanban and Swift TSP today as the focus of the Kanban webinar. You're welcome to check out our other offerings for other frameworks that you might be using. We have been really proud of our relationship with the Kanban community. David Anderson, the pioneer of the Kanban method, has been an early mentor and advisor, and we have been really fortunate to partner and interact with all a variety of different mentors and thought leaders, including the fine folks at SquirrelNorth. I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the various capabilities that Swift Kanban provides to you, especially in these times of focused remote work and collaboration. To the points that Fernando mentioned, I just want to talk about the visualization capabilities, the upstream and portfolio Kanban capabilities of Swift Kanban, and how our customers use them. The analytics that we provide, one of the things that we consider ourselves to be really strong in that. And finally, of course, a few other things that help you interact or use the tool in the various different contexts that you might have for using Scrum or Kanban or a combination of the two. And our tool is, of course, used in a variety of use cases between software, IT, and DevOps, as well as a range of business functions from marketing to HR to procurement and all kinds of other business functions. Firstly, Swift Kanban is really well known for the kind of modeling capability that we provide in terms of having multiple swim lanes within a board and be able to define specific workflows for each of those swim lanes. So we have a very clear-cut hierarchy that lets you define exactly the kind of process that you have, and as the process goes through any changes, it's easy to modify these changes. And you can see that using different levels of zoom, you can actually get a lot of coverage for your overall process and the work that you're focusing on. We provide support for a hierarchical workflow. So each stage of the workflow can be divided into sub-columns and sub-columns. So you have any number of levels of your workflow details defined through that. In addition to that, we provide a range of visual capabilities, such as the ability to, look at WIP limit violations, as you can see on the top of the column here. Blockers, as cards get blocked, you can see which columns are blocked, and also defining policies explicitly for each column, and you can see those policies appear on the top of your columns on the Kanban board where we define these policies. We provide for things such as the cycle time threshold, so you can actually get early alerts for cards that might be at risk of delay based on cycle time threshold that you can specify for specific critical columns of your workflow in order to be alerted whether cards are running okay or might be at risk of delay. And then at the individual card level, we have other types of visual alerts to show you whether cards belong to a particular class of service, whether they have certain data against them, whether they are aging, or they're not getting attention that they need to get in terms of the context of the work that you're doing. I talked a little bit about the cycle time threshold. It gives you that early alert capability that you can turn on and off, so you don't have to have a very cluttered view of the board. In addition, we have a calendar view. So a lot of you are working right now with very tough deadlines on things that you're trying to deliver as your work demands it, and as your business pivots or changes to meet those demands. So we have actually a calendar capability that lets you drive work based on due dates on your work and be able to see on the calendar what deadlines might be coming up. We have a strong support for upstream and portfolio Kanban that lets you scale from a small team to the entire enterprise. And we have some very active customers using this. So you have the ability to set up what we call special portfolio lanes that let you monitor high-level work, which is projects or programs or strategic initiatives or OKRs, and then let you drill down that into lower-level work items all the way down to maybe tasks or user stories that let you then connect. Firstly, it lets you get status of the work based on automatic detection of what is the progress that is being made at the child card level, and have these cards automatically moved on that progress scale, and also therefore define that full hierarchy view in order to be able to look at the overall context of the work that is being done, either top down or bottom up. And therefore, you can connect these boards, any level of boards in a hierarchy that lets you choose what is the breakdown of work you want to have and how you want to model them across one or multiple boards. So you could do this in a single board and have the hierarchy working, or you could have them connected across multiple boards. The good thing about the tool, and it's true for all of our tools, is that we provide contextual collaboration. So without having to leave your own board, you could actually ask questions of your teams, get the responses, get them notified and alerted on things that are going on, in order to make sure that the people who need to know what's going on are able to firstly get alerted to that and be able to respond to things that they need to respond to. We have specific support for upstream Kanban that lets you designate specific columns of your board, typically the early stage columns of your board, to say that these are my upstream columns where I'm going to work on initial analysis and approval of work that I'm going to take up, and therefore define a specific point of commitment on your board, and so that you can then do, based on this, specific analysis around upstream and downstream Kanban in terms of, for example, discard analysis and abort analysis, to see how much of your work that you initially came up with, whatever ideas you came up with, how much was actually taken up for work and how much was discarded. We have a range of metrics. Fernando mentioned a specific set of them. We provide, a very rich support to the Kanban method and some of the metrics that the Kanban method supports. That includes a cumulative flow diagram that you see on the top right here, the control chart that you see in the middle here, and just a variety of rich capabilities, including cycle time analysis, blocker analysis, your throughput and velocity analysis as well. In addition, of course, we have worked with the Kanban University to build the enterprise services planning module, which allows you to do really detailed analysis of your demand and capability, as well as your ability to forecast, what is it that you can deliver in a certain amount of time, whether it's a 30-day forecast at different levels of different levels of confidence and different levels of probability, or a defined scope forecast that lets you forecast when a particular release might get done. We provide specific support for Kanban cadences, and one of them is that we have something called a daily activity view that lets you automatically show what changed over the last 24 hours. So in a daily stand-up, you can easily focus on things that might need attention, and you can discuss and drill down, as you can see on the right-hand side, on specific cards to see what might have changed in those cards. I will come back to the board playback in a little bit. There is a very cool feature that we provide for you to do retrospectives in order to be able to look at working patterns of your board, and I'll come back and talk about that. Finally, we have some capabilities around defining dependencies across cards. And this is something that is very critical, especially at this time where you have dependency on maybe external partners and vendors, or of course your own customers, and you can easily depict those and be informed about the dependency that might exist across different types of work. We integrate with over 50 plus tools, including some of the popular tools in the Agile and the ALM space, including TFS, Jira, ServiceNow, and just a variety of these tools, especially also collaboration tools such as Slack and email and others that we're coming up with in the next few weeks. We, of course, have a mobile app that, of course, lets you be interactive and be connected with the team members on the go. And with that, I just want to close this out by mentioning a special offer that we have for people who are on the call today. That for the webinar attendees, we have already announced, this is something that we did 2 weeks ago. We have already announced a free availability of our Swift Kanban tool till end of June. For those people who are on the webinar today, we can extend that free trial on request for as long as you need. And then if you sign up by June 30th, we are offering a 10-year off 1-year subscription. While subscribing, you can simply use the code that is provided here, which is for SquirrelNorth Swift. With that, I'm going to just quickly get into one screen that I wanted to show you, which is our board playback function. And this is essentially a quick way for you to play back certain time periods of your board and be able to see the sort of work patterns of your team and be able to understand what needs to change, where things are overloaded, as you can see here, and where things might be a bottleneck and you might need to make process changes. So with that, I'm going to stop here and pass it on back to James.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Mahesh. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please use the Q&A button. You should see that at the bottom of your Zoom window. I see that Alexi's already answered several of them, so please keep those coming in. And any of the promotions or discount codes that you see, don't worry about having to write those down. We'll be redirecting you to a screen at the end that will have all of those listed. But without further ado, I'd like to now pass things on to Sonia Sidorova from Nave, and she's going to take things over for a few minutes. So Sonia, please.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Hey guys, my name is Sonia Sidorova, and I'm the founder and CEO at Nave. Nave is a Kanban analytics suite that helps Kanban practitioners optimize their workflow performance to achieve fast, smooth, and predictable delivery of customer value. We help managers establish a stable system in order to develop predictability in their delivery process. We enable them to identify impediments in their workflow, as well as make accurate delivery forecasts. We partner with the most popular management platforms on the market: Jira, Trello, Asana, and Azure DevOps. Nave is available as an add-on in their marketplaces. We also provide a manual data upload version in case we don't support your platform or you just need to anonymize your data. We have more integrations on our backlog coming to the end of this year: GitHub, Teamwork, Rally, and a few others as well. Behind the scene, we fetch all the data from your Kanban board. We analyze the activities of your cards, and we build the charts to help you manage your workflow effectively. We pull all your data from the moment of your board creation. This way, you can analyze your performance from the very beginning. We synchronize any changes immediately so you can track your progress in real time. Any updates in your Kanban board are instantly reflected in your graphs. Let me quickly show you how it works. This is the cumulative flow diagram. So how do you know how much is in progress and how much is actually being done? The cumulative flow diagram provides an overview of the current state of your process by tracking the total number of tasks in your progress each day. The vertical axis shows the number of tasks, while the horizontal axis plots your timeline. The graph is built from colored bands, with each band indicating how many tasks are present in each process state. You can also see the accumulated number of tasks completed, those in the done state, in the selected time frame. The horizontal distance between the top and the bottom line of a CFD area at any point along the graph is your approximate average cycle time. Approximate average cycle time shows how long it took on average for items to complete on the selected day. The cumulative flow diagram enables you to spot bottlenecks instantly. If one or more of the areas that represent work in progress start expanding, then it signifies a bottleneck stemming from the workflow. The top line on the graph represents the arrival rate of tasks, while the bottom line shows their departures. We need to monitor how the lines move over time in order to maintain a stable system. If WIP is increasing, then the distance between the lines will expand. This means that the arrival rate is higher than the departure rate, and knows that there is a bottleneck in the system and your team is struggling to deliver results. To maintain a stable system, strive to keep your WIP as consistent as possible. If the WIP is consistent, arrival rate and departure rate lines will grow in sync, and the distance between them will stay equal. It is important to say that the data displayed on a CFD depicts only what has happened for a given process, and it shouldn't be used for any type of future prediction. The cycle time scatter plot can be of great help when it comes to making probabilistic forecasts. The diagram displays all of your completed tasks as dots scattered on a plot. The horizontal axis is your timeline, while the vertical axis tells you how long tasks have taken to complete. The dotted horizontal lines stretching across the graph are called percentile lines. We use percentiles to establish service level agreements and define the probability of different commitment points being met. For example, the 50th percentile on this scatter plot points to 9 days. This means that half of the tasks so far have been completed in less than 9 days. We can now say that any future task we take on has a 50% chance of being finished in less than 9 days. Of course, the percentile you use to define SLAs largely depends on your context. You and your clients may be happy with an 85% certainty, or you both may need a confidence level that's higher than that. You can also filter your data by class of service. It is highly likely that 85th percentile for fixed delivery date tasks, for example, comes with a different cycle time than the 85th percentile for expedites. That way, you can provide different SLAs for different work items you're committing. To optimize your workflow performance, you need to break your delivery times down to smaller pieces and evaluate the improvement opportunities. This is best achieved in the cycle time breakdown chart. The diagram displays the cycle times of your completed tasks split by process state. The horizontal axis is a timeline, while the vertical axis tells you how long in total tasks have taken to complete. By analyzing the different sections on the bars, you can assess how the time spent in each process state affects the overall time needed to finish your work. The most important information to get from the cycle time breakdown chart is how the data changes in time. It is an indicator of continuous improvement. If the longest sections are going down, this is a sign that your improvement efforts are paying off. But if the cycle times are going up, it is better to take a step back and analyze the reasons behind that behavior. The cycle time histogram shows the frequency distribution of the completion times of the tasks in your workflow, with frequency on the vertical axis and cycle time on the horizontal axis. By analyzing the distribution of your cycle times, you'll be able to determine whether there is too much variability in your process. A wide spread indicates your cycle time varies significantly and your workflow is inconsistent. Average cycle time is a measure of performance. In this chart, we show the mean, median, and mode average cycle times and how the trends build over time. Ideally, the lines should be close to each other, stay even, or go down. If the values are going up, then you might need to reevaluate your work in progress limits or alter your process policies. The aging chart enables you to track your current tasks in progress. It uses the same visual format as your Kanban board, with each column representing a state in your process. The left vertical axis shows how many days a task has already spent in progress. So the colored zones draw the timeline of how your tasks have advanced in the past. By observing how your current work is moving through the zones, you are staying on top of your commitments. We recommend taking a closer look at the tasks that just move to the red zone. The higher the cycle time, the higher the chance of a delay. The aging chart allows you to change your basis day to see how your process looked like on a certain day in the past. It is very useful during retrospectives to see how work items were aging back then. According to Little's law, maintaining a stable system depends on two main factors: your work in progress and your average age of work in progress. For these two metrics, the key is consistency. Predictable systems are determined by keeping both your WIP and the average age of your WIP consistent. The average age of WIP and cycle time are essentially the same metric, only cycle time is measured against completed tasks, whereas the age of a task is a measure concerning tasks that are still in progress. If the average age of WIP stays roughly equal on a daily basis, then its trend line will be linear, neither increasing nor decreasing over time. This means that you're maintaining a stable system. If you find that the line is sporadic, at times increasing or decreasing dramatically, this points to an inconsistent average age and at the root of these spikes, bottleneck in the system that need to be addressed. The throughput run chart displays the throughput of your team on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis and compares its values over time. On the horizontal axis is a timeline, and the vertical axis shows a number of completed tasks. Each bar consists of colored sections representing the type of completed work. The throughput breakdown chart on the top helps you evaluate what kind of requests are demanding most of the time. It is especially effective when you want to emphasize the high volume of expedite requests you're handling. The throughput line chart visualizes how trends have developed. Ideally, the line should stay even or increase smoothly. The closer the values are, the more stable your process. The throughput histogram allows you to visualize how consistently your team is delivering results. On the horizontal axis is the number of tasks completed on a day, while the vertical axis shows the number of days that had a certain throughput. The throughput histogram is calculating your throughput averages using the mean, median, and mode values of your throughput frequency distribution. And your average throughput over the month is the most important metric you want to discover from this chart. It is a representation of your capacity to deliver. Over time, you can identify trends in your delivery rates. Ideally, your average throughput should increase smoothly or stay at similar levels. The flow efficiency is another key metric in Kanban, telling you how much time you spend actually working on your assignments. Essentially, flow efficiency is the ratio between your active time and total time. Any reduction of inactive time will improve your overall cycle time. Looking at wait time is usually the easiest and cheapest area to investigate first when it comes to process improvement. You can use the flow efficiency chart to track your average flow efficiency. The higher your flow efficiency is, the faster and smoother tasks flow through your process. You can also assess how your efficiency trends changed over time to evaluate your improvement efforts. To come up with a range of probabilities when forecasting completion dates for multiple tasks, we use Monte Carlo delivery date simulation. The simulation relies on a large number of random trials based on past throughput data to predict the throughput for a future time frame. You define the start date and the number of tasks, and the simulation will provide a range of delivery dates and the probability coming with each date. For any date in the future, it will use the throughput of a random day in the past to simulate how many work items are likely to get done. The simulation is repeated tens of thousands of times before the results are presented in the form of a probability distribution, with percentiles increasing from left to right. The further you go in time, the greater the certainty of completing all tasks. Monte Carlo number of task simulation works on the same principle, but instead of predicting the due date of a certain amount of tasks, it produces a probabilistic forecast on how many items can be completed within a certain time frame. If you're interested in having a demo session with your own data at Nave, please contact me and we'll schedule a call. We're giving away a special discount today. You can save 10% on your annual plan if you subscribe until 30th of June. I hope you got some valuable takeaways out of this presentation, and it will help you manage your remote teams more effectively. Thank you and stay safe.
Okay, thank you very much, Sonia. That was great. Please keep the questions coming in. I see that they're still coming in, and Alexi's getting to many of them. If your question hasn't been answered yet, it's possible that Alexi might be curating a few for the question and answer session. So if it hasn't been answered yet, don't worry. Even if we don't get to all of them, when we send the follow-up email, we'll answer any questions that maybe we didn't have a chance to get to. But for now, I'd like to get to our last speaker. I'd like to hand it over to Dimitar from Kanbanize.
Thanks, James. I'm sharing my screen now. I hope you guys can see it. My name is Dimitar, and I'm one of the founders of Kanbanize. I'm also the CEO of the company. And today I would like to show you what we can do. So first of all, what is Kanbanize? Well, we are a platform that was built to help you scale Kanban and basically any agile implementation across your entire company. This is what we conceived the company with, and this is what we've been doing for the past several years. We are an active member of the Kanban community since 2014. We've been a title sponsor for the majority of Kanban conferences, and we are, of course, a Kanban University partner. As a platform, we care about those 5 things. First of all, we want to help you implement a pure Kanban. That's what we believe in. We are Kanban purists, and we support any deep implementation as the Kanban maturity model describes. We care a lot about flexibility. We talked about this, Fernando mentioned it. If you have a physical or any digital Kanban board anywhere, you can recreate it in Kanbanize because we support many flexible scenarios, which I'm going to showcase in just a bit. We care deeply about simplicity and UX, and there's a fine balance between simplicity and flexibility, as you can imagine. So we spend thousands of hours each year thinking how to make it as flexible as possible, at the same time have a great UX and simple usability. Automation is a big piece for us. We believe in automation, and especially in times like these, I personally believe that automation is a saver, because when we're not all collocated and when communication is hindered, then we need automation to keep things under balance. And of course, metrics. Any decent Kanban tool should support metrics out of the box. And now I dare to say that we have a very rich set of those. So let's switch gears, and I show you the simplest form of board inside Kanbanize. You have just the three columns: requested, in progress, and done. They're color coded. So what's not started is blue, and what's in progress is orange right here, and the done area is green. You can also think about this as commitment lines. So it's very easy to go from this to that, just a few clicks. We now have horizontal lanes, 3 in this particular scenario. Again, a few clicks and you have merged columns and merged lanes. And then you have a bunch of subcolumns. You can have unlimited subcolumns in Kanbanize. You can put whip limits anywhere on the column level, on the lane level, on the cell level, across multiple columns. As I said, we're Kanban maniacs, so we make sure you can limit everything everywhere. Again, the next complexity with simplicity that we can add is multiple workflows. So we have this cards workflow here having 5 columns or something, and then we have this one, which is the expedite, which only has 3 columns. You can add as many workflows in Kanbanize as you need, and each of them can have separate, a different structure. All right, so, until now, I was showing you how we can manage basically tasks or cards that you typically see on a Kanban board. The next thing I'm going to show you is now how we scale to a second level. This is what we call initiatives. An initiative is a collection of cards, or you can think of it as a small project. You can have initiatives on the same board where you have the cards. You break down an initiative across multiple cards. And when the first card is started, the initiative is started automatically. So it sits here under requested. And when any of those 4 children cards gets started, the initiative goes automatically to in progress. Then as the children cards are being completed, we will calculate the progress for you. We see 25% for this particular one. And this is also based on the size of each of the cards. Getting one level higher, now we see a timeline. We'll also have this special workflow in Kanbanize that allows you to plan initiatives or projects in this particular scenario on a timeline calendar type of view. So we have the project, it's being broken down into an initiative, and then the initiative is broken down into cards. When the first card somewhere here is started, then this initiative is started, and then this project 1 is started all automatically. When a project is started, it's moved to today. So I started this project today, and we will track the progress for each of the layers automatically. This is one board, 3 levels of work. But what if we want to scale that even higher and then go to 2 boards and 3 boards and 5 boards and the whole company? Well, that's where we introduce the management workspace idea. So we have 2 types of workspaces in Kanbanize: a team workspace, that's what I've been showing you so far, and management workspace. When you introduce a management workspace, you connect it to team boards, or as we will see a bit later, other management workspaces. So in this particular scenario, I have connected this board to 2 team boards, and this looks like this. This time I have programs. I've decided to track my programs on a timeline, and I've broken down my programs into projects, the same projects that we saw before. across two teams. So I have engineering board and I have my simple board. Those are two different team boards. We have connected the initiative workflows of those team boards to my management board. So I now have another hierarchical level. And I can, as a program manager or as a portfolio manager, I can break down those programs with the corresponding project managers into projects who can then work with the teams to actually deliver the work. And then we can go one level above. Actually, we can go unlimited levels above. But let's say we now care about some sort of strategy and goals. So I have a parent management workspace that we connect to a child management workspace. So it looks like this. This time I have an initiatives workflow. I can choose a timeline, initiatives workflow, any type of workflow that I want and that I prefer. And I prefer this simple representation. As a CEO of a company or any steering committee, we have two strategic goals and we break them down into programs. If that's your terminology, great. If it's not, you can pick your own terminology. Those things are entirely customizable, so we don't enforce any terminology on you. And if the program project sort of thing is not your type of doing work, it doesn't need to be. So again, now we have a fifth layer of work hierarchy introduced, and I can continue scaling that as much as I want. So this is our approach at scaling work with Kanban and Kanbanize, but it looks like this. So we have the teams right here. As I showed you, then we have the portfolios, then we have the strategic, and then we can scale up as much as we want. All right, what about metrics? We talked that metrics are fairly important. I bet that whatever Kanban metrics you want and need, you will find them in Kanbanize. Actually, we integrate Actionable Agile. Maybe you have heard about this software. So it's entirely embedded into Kanbanize, and if you get the analytics package, you get those out of the box. Fairly rich data analysis tools. We have Monte Carlo simulations, cycle time scatter plots, of course, a cumulative flow diagram, basically anything you can think of, it's in there. I'd like to show you something real quick. I hope you can still see my browser. This is how Kanbanize looks like. So I have those boards that I showed you before. I have strategic goals, portfolio, and then two team boards. Let me just show you very quickly. I have strategic goals, two goals, programs, then I switch to the portfolio. I have the programs and then the projects, and then I go to my simple board. I have project 4 and some tasks. So I take a random task and I pull it to in progress. So see what happens now with the project. I pull the card here, project 4 goes to in progress. Then I go to my portfolio board. What do I see? I see the same project 4 is in progress, but it's a child card of this program, which was automatically started. You see that it's now pulled until today. And then if I go to my strategic goals, I see that strategic goal 2 is now in progress. And its child program, this program is right here also in progress. So one simple action on a team board, on a task level, will trigger a whole chain of events up the hierarchy, providing real-time update of everything, which basically eliminates the need of status reporting and much more than that, but I'll cover that in a minute. Something very important about automation. We talked about automation, that we care deeply about it. I want to showcase the business rules engine. So the business rules in Kanbanize is something like a visual programming language. You can say things like when a card is created, so when a card is created, and it is created on this board or on that board. And for example, the title of the card contains some string, let's say urgent, then I want to change the color of the card to be red. And also I want to send a custom notification to the assignee of the card with that text inside. So when you save this business rule, the automation is in place and it will hook to the system. It will operate right away. As you can see, we have a bunch of triggers. So when a card is created, when a card is updated, when a card is moved, time-based rules. We have when a WIP limit is reached, when a WIP limit is exceeded. You can do all sorts of crazy things with the business rules engine in Kanbanize. I urge you to take a look. So now going back to my presentation, I want to close with the question, why bother? Why should you even care about those things? Well, first of all, I think automation is a big deal, especially when you work remotely. Because right now we can't just gather around the whiteboard or in a meeting and discuss status and discuss where things are. We need somebody to hold our hand or something to hold our hand to make things explicit. With the approach we propose, you connect planning with execution. I think the flaw of more of the systems out there is that they're either used for planning or used for execution, and there's nothing there that glues these two together. And as a result, we have some plans that are totally unrealistic, and then teams that are bombarded with expedites just because the plans are not being met. With this approach, we have stable teams. We don't have to reshuffle teams very often, which allows us to collect a lot of data, which we can then seed into the management layer and use for forecasting. As I showed you, we have real-time feedback between the teams and the management, and this is much easier to manage. We don't have to report because everything is in there in real time. I didn't show you this, but you can actually limit work in progress across the programs, across the goals, across the epics, whatever. So if a team member somewhere on a board is about to start a task that is going to exceed the WIP limit on the epics level, we will stop that and we will give feedback to the team member. We have analytics. I showed you can run analytics across multiple boards, across multiple hierarchies, which is also quite useful. And last but not least, with this approach, you can forecast with real data at hand. Instead of relying on estimations, story points, or whatever, we just take the real data, feed it up the hierarchy, and we'll let you know whether things are actually going to get done based on your plans. So I think that's very important. Thank you for the time, and please make sure to check our promotion. We're giving 7 free trials for up to 6 months, completely free. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Dimitar. Okay, it looks like I think we probably have a few questions that Alexi has probably curated for us. And if not, now would be a chance for you to ask a few. So for the moment, I think I'd like to pass things over to Alexi for just a few moments.
Yes, thank you, James. Indeed, we have a few questions because the count of answered questions currently stands at 21. That leaves us with only a few, so I'll try to be quick with this because I realize I'm at the very end of the webinar. So we have one participant with 3 grouped questions. How much effort should we invest in digitization of everything that was not digital? Second part of the question, any thoughts about dealing with continuous improvement during this pandemic time? And the third part, what symptoms can you describe to realize that some cases should be reviewed? So overall, I think even in the best of times, in really calm times, continuous improvement shouldn't be for its own sake. We should pursue some continuous improvement for the sake of improving the experience and outcomes of our customers, to make work and life easier for, let's say, the company's employees. So we need that kind of justification, and that justification has just heightened significantly because of the pandemic, because people's minds are so occupied, sometimes with pretty basic needs of survival, and to make everything safe and keep their families safe, healthy, and well-fed, and so on. The toilet paper concerns, so to speak. So therefore, on one hand, there is a heightened justification for any kind of continuous improvement initiative. It cannot be a thing in itself. It has to justify some kind of tangible, be justified by some kind of tangible improvement of customer experience or employee experience. But at the same time, there's never been a better time to start it, because if there's something that was really diminishing the experience of your customers in the old times, something that you wanted to improve, but you put it off for a while, now is a really good time to kind of revisit it and get started on it. So as you apply this rule, things that you kind of never got around to do in better times, now is the time to do it. You will see that some of these things are worth doing, and the other things are not worth doing, and you'll see what you need to digitize or automate and whatnot. As for the cadences, generally, we need faster feedback cycles nowadays, and we have seen, let's say, in our elected leaders in certain locations where the response to the pandemic has been really good and effective, then they really operate on very fast feedback cycles. They don't wait, let's say, for 1 month's worth of data to emerge. They respond much quicker than that, and sometimes they find enough signal that rises above noise in just one news story, and then they respond to that. So if anything, the duration of feedback cycles has to decrease, frequencies have to increase. And we also have another interesting question from Richard. So he starts with a preamble about empathy during the shift, working from home. It's doubly true in their business. Yes. So some recommendations for SDM and delivery teams to educate stakeholders, customers, that we have no predictability to deliver with the new demand created to survive this new environment. Yes. So as I said before, so if your current delivery team or the service delivery manager, SDM, are not in good contact with customers or stakeholders just yet, there's never been a better time to really get in the same virtual room and start talking to each other. So on one hand, your current delivery capability, the service level agreement that you can offer your customers, as Martin described, may not be very good, and now it's gotten even worse, perhaps. So you've got some bad news to bring to the table. But on the other hand, your customers and stakeholders also understand that this is new world, and they, just from personal experience of these 2-week lead times at their grocery store, or 3 or 4 week SLA for Amazon Prime instead of next day, they have calibrated their expectations somewhat, and they may actually be in a good position to understand you and to start working with you on how to improve the way you work together with them, so that they get good services soon enough. So I also tried to answer as many questions as possible using the Q&A box. So I hope that worked for a good number of participants. And now I'd like to turn it over back to James for the closing remarks.
Great. Thank you very much, Alexei. You'll see now on the screen, we have a feedback form. We'd really appreciate if you could take the time to fill that out. It's just a couple of really quick questions. You'll be redirected to that at the conclusion of the webinar, which is momentarily. Lastly, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to today's webinar. I'd also like to thank our 3 guest speakers, Sonia, Mahesh, Dimitar. Thank you very much. Tremendous presentations. We'll be sending everyone a follow-up email shortly. There were a few questions asking about the slides and a video of the webinar. Yes, we'll be providing that. There'll also be links to the products that were overviewed today. And we'll also have all the details about the promotions that you saw throughout the webinar. So we're now going to redirect you to a page containing that brief survey, as well as all those details. And on behalf of the SquirrelNorth team, Martin, Fernando, Alexi, and myself, best wishes and hope to see you all soon.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Bye. Thank you.
Stay safe. Yes.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day, night, whatever. Cheers.